So this is Dawah 101 by Dr. David Wood. Oh, it's not? I thought that's what you said. What is it? What? It does that not Oh, yeah. This Yes. This is dealing with Dawah. Are you ready? Because whether or not you're ready, it's coming.
Her title, and she ruined it. Anyway. All right, check one. Wait, let me start. Don't want Elle to yell at me. All right, so we're going to talk about Dawah. One of the coolest topics ever. Dawah. Actually, well, I'll keep it simple here. Going to have some good news, then we'll talk about some bad news, and then we'll talk about some more good news. So easy breakdown there. I've got some good news. I got some bad news, and then I'll have some more good news. So start with the good news about Dawah, and that's that the Dawah of basically the past 14 centuries is completely crumbling. It's almost a complete joke at this point. But if you look at just the way things were, if you look at the way things were just 15, 16, 17 years ago, my goodness, you guys don't know how good you have it right now. You have no clue how good you have it right now. If you were criticizing Islam in like 2006, 2007, 2008, sorry, there's no other way to say it, it sucked. It sucked criticizing Islam, criticizing Muhammad, criticizing the Quran back in 2006, 2000. Were you criticizing Islam back in 2006, 2007, 2008? Yeah.
Talk.
Okay. So you might not have known how terrible it was, although you would have had a lot more feedback from Muslims. But if you were back then, and there were not a lot of us back then. There was like Tony Costa up in Canada. There were a couple of us in America. There was Samuel Green down in Australia. There was Jay Smith in the UK. There were not a lot of people who were like publicly going after Islam. And it was not great because you got attacked from every direction. Every direction you were getting blasted. You criticized Muhammad, Muslims blasted you as a liar. And they said, this guy's a liar, and he's just an Islamophobe, and he's just a bigot, and he's just a racist. He can't stand brown people. That's why he's criticizing Islam. That's it. So then people think you're this racist or something like that. That's what you get from the Muslims. The atheists said, how dare you criticize a religion when you're religious too? All religions are stupid. So you're a stupid person criticizing other people for being stupid, you hypocrite. And then Christians said what? How are you criticizing them when you're just supposed to love them? So you got blasted by Christians for being mean and hateful. Everyone from every single side was blasting away at you. And think about it. What are you doing? You're sitting there going, here's this Muslim I met here or there, and all these things that he believes about his religion, I'm looking up and they're not true. His head has been filled with lies. And I want to help him so that he can make an informed decision, not a decision based on a bunch of lies. I'm trying to help him. And you're trying to help him, and everyone's blasting you as the worst person in the world. It was not fun. It was not fun back then. Fast forward, things are very different nowadays. So you count your blessings, ladies and gentlemen, count your blessings. Things are way better now because all the things we were called liars for saying back then, now Muslims are shouting these things from the rooftops. Back then we said, hey, did you know that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl? Everyone said, bull, you're a liar. Now they admit it. Now they admit it and they defend it. Back then, if you said, there's a death penalty for leaving Islam, so we need to take this very seriously. We have people leaving Islam and there's this death penalty. We need to make sure Muslims are never in a position of power to enforce this death penalty. You were called a liar. And you could sit there and pull out the source. Say, look, it says right here, Sahih al-Bukhari says, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. Liar. What do you mean? I can read words off a page. That's what it says. No. You don't understand. See, all this means is that if someone leaves Islam and goes and joins a foreign military and then comes back and attacks the Muslim community, then we can fight in self-defense. What's your problem with that, you hypocrite? And keep in mind, back then, almost no one in the West knew anything about Islam. So think about this. If you have let's say a Christian, and he says, hey, Islam has this death penalty. Look, here's the passage. And then you have all these Muslim leaders saying, no, you don't understand the passage. You're only doing that because you're a racist and an Islamophobe and a bigot and so on. If you actually understood, here's what it really means. Who do you believe? Well, you might say, I don't know who to believe or something like that. But guess what? You don't have an accurate understanding because you don't know who to believe. Or you believe the Muslims. Or you believe the Muslims because, well, it's their religion. They can speak for their religion. And so that's what it was like. That's what it was like back then. Everything you said, liar, and so on. You start wondering why. Is this really worth it? It didn't feel like anyone was listening. And then here and there, all of a sudden you'd hear, hey, I just left Islam. It's like, oh. Well, actually, if that's the only person who left Islam, it was worth it for that one person. It was worth it for that one person. And so you keep going, and then you hear another person, another person, another person, another person, another person. Anyway, 20 years go by, and all of a sudden we get what's called the avalanche of apostasy. We didn't call it that, they called it that. Because the apostasy rates of young Muslims went from basically around 0% 20 years ago to 24% just a couple of years ago. Now that is very rapid, right? And if you go around the world, this is happening everywhere. It's estimated that between 5 and 10% of people who are actually counted as Muslims in Muslim countries are actually closet atheists at this point. Iran is now a Muslim minority country. If you go there, everyone will say they're Muslim if it's an official government type thing. But they did it where identities weren't known. 40% of the population of Iran say they still believe in some version of Islam, whether Sunni, Shia, Sufi, or what. It's a Muslim minority nation right now. That is a very, very rapid shift. So that's what's going on in the Muslim world. And so, again, count your blessings. We are in a completely different world right now, where you can say something about Muhammad, something about the Quran, and people can't simply dismiss you by calling you a liar, because there are enough people who know that what you're saying is true that they can defend the points. So these are actually really, really, really awesome times to be in. And to understand a little bit about Dawah, I'm going to take you. There's like one core principle of Dawah that's been there from the beginning, that's still around today. It just changes forms over time. So during the time of Muhammad, Muhammad starts in Mecca. Who's around Muhammad in Mecca? Who said Jews and Christians? In Mecca? Come on, bunch of pagan polytheists, man. What are you talking about? So, got a bunch of pagans in Mecca, got a bunch of polytheists in Mecca, and their polytheistic worship. And so Muhammad, in that environment, now he's a caravan trader. So before that, so he'd encountered various people and so on. He'd heard their stories and so on. But if you have a big population of pagans, then even if you run into Christians or Jews here and there, if you have a big population of pagans, you can kind of tell them whatever you want about the Bible, right? If you're saying you're in the same line of prophets with these guys, do they know any better? They don't know a lot. So you can say, hey, I'm in their scriptures. Yeah, I'm in the Torah. Yeah, I'm in the gospel. And you can run around using that as your argument. Watch what happens. Very important, because again, this is the pattern for all future Dawah. Muhammad's going around telling pagans, hey, I'm in their scriptures. I'm in their scriptures. Did you know I'm in their scriptures? Yeah, I'm in their scriptures. Once you run into these guys, you'll see they'll admit that I'm in their scriptures. Went around telling people that for years. Built up a small Muslim community, then started growing, especially when the message changed around the time they're going to Medina, and the message changed to, now we're going to go around taking everyone's stuff. And so join me, we're going to go take their stuff. And if you die, you go to paradise and you spend eternity deflowering virgins. And but if you survive, then we take all their stuff and you go back and you got a bunch of stuff. So that's when Muhammad starts getting tons and tons of followers. But there's an issue. All of a sudden you get to Medina. You have 3 big Jewish tribes there. So he's been telling his pagan converts all along, these are the guys who can confirm me. He gets there, and of course, they almost laugh him out of the city. What are you talking about, dude? You're the most obvious false prophet in history. And so that's sort of the beginning of Muhammad's hostility towards the Jews. That's what amps it up. It was a massive embarrassment. It was utter humiliation. These are the guys who, Christians and Jews are the ones who are going to affirm me. Oh, now we got 3 Jewish tribes here. They reject him. And so that's when you have, well, they're just evil. They know I'm there, but they cover it up because they're evil. And so these are people who we just have to wipe them out. They're so evil. But look at the pattern right there. You spread your argument in an atmosphere of ignorance until when you eventually run into people who can expose your argument, you have enough people who can silence them. That happens over and over and over again. Give a bogus argument that no one is in any position to respond to. Keep that going. Build up enough followers until when someone can actually expose the argument, you've got a big enough mob to silence the critic. Over and over and over again. Look for an atmosphere of ignorance. Use an argument that no one is in a position to respond to. You can follow this all the way through history, but to keep it, here in the West, where as far as when Islam spread, as far as when Islam started spreading, probably the 1960s in the African American community, when people like Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and so on started preaching Islam. You had all these Muslim preachers. What were the actual knowledgeable Dawah guys saying that was convincing these guys to convert? Was Christianity is the religion that enslaves people. Muhammad was the great liberator of slaves. In Islam, everyone's equal. Christianity oppresses the black man. Someone just asked me yesterday, how did people fall for that? And it's like, well, how would you not? No one was in a position to respond. They didn't have Sahih al-Bukhari. Hadn't even been translated in English yet. No one had that. They didn't have Sahih al-Bukhari. They didn't have Sahih Muslim. They didn't have Sunan Abu Dawud. So all you have to go on is the word of this preacher, word of the Muslim preacher. And based on what he tells you, you get these conversions and so on, and of some popular figures. But it was an atmosphere of ignorance of the Muslim sources. No one had the sources to know how to respond to this. And it wasn't a few more decades until people actually had the sources. We have the sources now, right? And so this is just how it works over and over again. And then eventually got the scientific miracles argument, and eventually got the argument from the miraculous perfect preservation of the Quran. If you said in the year, let's say 2000, the Quran has been, if I walked into this room and it was a bunch of people in here, and I said in the year 2000, the Quran has been miraculously preserved, dot for dot, letter for letter, from the time it was revealed to Muhammad down to the present. And every scholar in the world, Muslim or non-Muslim, will agree that not one letter has ever changed in any single copy of the Quran. This is a miracle. How many people in that room would have any clue how to respond to that? No one knew that. No one knew anything about Quran manuscripts or about the history of the Quran. So they went around saying that. They went around saying that over and over. They spread the miracles of the Quran, the scientific miracles of the Quran. When they went in and said, did you know that the Quran predicted the Big Bang and that no one could have known this until the present, and NASA is just confirming this verse of the Quran? How does anyone know how to respond to that? No one knows. It's an atmosphere of ignorance. That's what Dawah does. It goes into an atmosphere of ignorance, which, by the way, is the only place it works. It only works in an atmosphere of ignorance. And you keep people in a state of ignorance as much as possible, feeding them arguments for Islam that they have no idea how to respond to, until you build up enough people to where you can't criticize it. You can't criticize it. Then you get sort of the modern version of this. So if you look at someone like Zakir Naik, I was watching his lectures and trying to figure out how anyone is falling for this, because almost anything he was saying, you could actually look it up, and it was wrong. Nabil once made a video, 25 errors in 5 minutes. He went through a 5-minute clip of Zakir Naik and was like, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. You remember that's where Dr. Whitemeat came from? Zakir Naik was going, and the famous scholar, Dr. Whitemeat. Yeah, Sir Dr. Whitemeat. Nabil's responding. He's funny because he's totally deadpan. He's going, there is no Sir Dr. Whitemeat anywhere. Right? But guess what? The entire audience is sitting there. Oh, wow, it's so brilliant. How many, if there are 10,000 people at a Zakir Naik lecture, and he's talking, and he's saying things, and he makes things up for 3 hours, who in that audience is going back and saying, let me examine this to find out if it's right?
One more great thing. Most people in his audience do not speak English.
Mhm.
And they clap hands.
Yeah, I heard that from people in India. They're like, hey, we go to these things and people cheer. Most of the people there don't even know what they're cheering for. They're just told, hey, when some guy in the front starts cheering, everyone starts bursting into applause. And it has a psychological effect. That has a psychological effect. He's right. I've heard that from people in India there. So I'm trying to figure this out. I eventually called it Islam's 99-1 rule. I called it Islam's 99-1 rule, meaning if you've got an audience, if you've got a bunch of listeners, and 99% of them are just going to mindlessly agree with anything you say, and even 1% are going to question what you're saying and go look it up, which, by the way, is being massively generous. It's not 1%. It's a tiny, tiny fraction. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of 1% who would actually go look this up. Go look up what he's saying and challenge it. But if 99% are mindlessly agreeing with anything you say, and only 1% are going to challenge it, guess what? The 99 can silence the 1. They can threaten him. They can mob him, call him stupid, call him names, call him racist, bigot, all that stuff. They can silence him. That's how Islam has functioned all along. That's how Islam has functioned all along. There's just been some variations of that standard pattern, that standard approach. So it's always been the 99-1 rule. When Muhammad was speaking early on, he's using a variation of that 99-1 rule. If I'm talking to a bunch of ignorant people who have no clue how to go look up what I'm saying, guess what? By the time we run into someone who can respond, I can silence those guys. I can silence them. So that's been the pattern. That's been the pattern of Islam. And pretty successful pattern over the centuries. And then all of a sudden, you get down to the past couple decades or so when people can start responding to Zakir Naik through like videos or social media or something, right? So something happened where all of a sudden, we suddenly got open access to Islam's most trusted sources. So again, for 14 centuries, most Christians in most parts of the world didn't have access to the Muslim sources. So if a Muslim preacher came to that area, they had no idea how to respond. And so when the Muslim preacher came, he knew that he was speaking in an atmosphere of ignorance. And so he could just figure out what people are interested in. What do these people value? Whatever they value, I'm going to say Muhammad is the champion of that. So, you guys believe in women's rights? Did you know that Muhammad was the greatest feminist of all time? Everyone agrees on that. All scholars, just ask them. I know you're not going to go look it up. You're not going to go around questioning all scholars, so I can just say whatever I want. All experts agree that Muhammad was the greatest feminist of all time. You guys like science? The Quran is a fountain of scientific knowledge. Doesn't matter what you're interested in. Muhammad was the source. Muhammad was the great source of democracy and freedom and religious liberty. All these things, they all came from Muhammad. So you didn't know because people are trying to hide the truth. And that worked. That worked really, 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 really well. Until then all of a sudden we get open access to their sources. And now people are in a position when the Muslim preacher says, hey, did you know Muhammad is the greatest feminist of all time? Some hands go up. Hey, we have some questions for you. What about this? What about this passage right here where a guy beat his wife until her skin turned green, and she comes to Muhammad to try and make him, to try and get her husband to stop this, and Muhammad blames her. What about that? Guess what? No one, until we had those sources, no one could have brought that up. But now we're in a position where when the preacher comes into an area and starts making things up, even though there's still plenty of ignorance, about Islam, there are enough people to start putting some cracks in the Dawah, right? There are enough people around who can start saying, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem here. And so one, we have open access to their sources now. And two, probably equally important, for 14 centuries, Muslims in the Muslim world, Muslim leaders have been able to keep Muslims insulated from ever hearing criticisms against Islam. So the Muslim leader, it's not just the Dawah guy talking to non-Muslims. It's Muslim leaders talking to Muslims in, let's say, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia or something. They can tell Muslims, they filter their knowledge for them to keep them completely confident of Islam. And they don't hear criticisms. How are you going to hear criticisms of Islam? You go over there and start running your mouth about Islam, you're going to get your head chopped off pretty darn quick. So they could keep them insulated from ever hearing criticisms against Islam. Now you can talk to a Muslim on your cell phone in Saudi Arabia, on Facebook right now. And so that has changed. Now they can't keep Muslims in Muslim countries isolated, insulated from hearing criticisms of Islam or from hearing presentations of alternatives to Islam. So everything has been changing very rapidly. In other words, the chief advantage that Islam had for 14 centuries was that people were ignorant about Islam. They didn't know about the Quran. They didn't know about Muhammad. They didn't know how to respond if someone gave them an argument for Islam. And now the world has just changed. Now we can criticize Islam. Now we know how to respond. And now Muslims are hearing it. And what's happening? The apostasy rate is going through the roof. It's going through the roof. So that's the good news. That's the good news. People are leaving Islam. There are fewer and fewer people in a state of ignorance. So that's the good news. The bad news is that Muslim leaders are in a state of absolute panic right now. Again, they're the ones who call it the avalanche of apostasy. And they're telling that to Muslim audiences, saying, we have to do something right now. See, if you go back 20 years, the attitude of Muslim leaders was, we actually don't have to do anything. We win. We can sit back and watch, and we win, just because of birth rates. We can sit back and do nothing. We win and rule the world by birth rates. They would still do dawah because they want to speed it up. But if you're looking back then, as we win, it's math. It's straightforward math. People don't leave Islam. People don't leave Islam, and we have by far the highest birth rates. Do the math. It's a matter of time. We win. So back then, they weren't in a state of panic. They don't have to panic. We can relax. We win. Fast forward 20 years. Now, the attitude of Muslim leaders is, if we sit back and do nothing, we are doomed, because the apostasy rate's going like that. If we don't do something, not now, right now, what's the apostasy rate going to be like 10, 20 years from now? 50%? We've got to do something right now or we lose. We're doomed. So they understand that it's now or never. And what that means is we have to deal with more dawah than ever, right? Back in the day, it was Zakir Naik and a couple of his followers and stuff. Now there's da'is everywhere. Dawagandists are everywhere right now. And so we have to deal with more dawah than ever. And by the way, if you have no functioning moral compass, if you're in here and you have no functioning moral compass, you want to become very popular right now, just become a dawah guy and go out thumping your chest. I'm the one who will save the future of Islam with my powerful dawah. They will shower you with money and attention instantly. And so you start seeing all these new dawah guys, and they have kind of two goals. They have two main goals. One, they're looking for anyone who's coming up with some new argument that people aren't familiar with, because you got to come up with a new argument, because all the old arguments, they don't work anymore. Because people, we call it the Dawah script. They don't want to go near. They don't want to use the old arguments anymore. So if you can come up with some new argument or some new criticism of Christianity, you can get really popular really quick. So they love that. And the other thing they love is they're still looking for pockets of ignorance. So they like going on other people's podcasts. If someone has a large podcast or something, they know on the viewers on that podcast, there's going to be a lot of people who don't know about Islam. So if we could go on there and give some pitch for Islam, there's going to be lots of people on there who don't know any better. And so we can find some more ignorant people and win those guys to Islam. And so they're looking for ignorance. And so we're in a position where dawah is becoming really popular. Even as it's crumbling, they're in a situation where they're desperate. So I mean, just think about it. If you're worried about future generations of Islam or Islam collapsing and so on, all of a sudden back then you were comfortable. We don't have to worry about anything, so we don't have to put a lot of emphasis on that. We're going to win. Now you're in a state of panic. So we have to do something. We have to do something right now. So putting a lot of attention on dawah. So that's the bad news. more Dawah than ever, even though Islam is crumbling from within. So now for the other good news. The other good news is that if this Dawah push, if this big Dawah push fails, there is no plan B. There's nowhere else to go. This is not how Islam is supposed to go, right? Islam's supposed to grow and grow and grow and take over the world. If Islam is crumbling right now and they put all their efforts into Dawah to rescue Islam and it doesn't work, what else have they got? What else have they got? So this is a perfect time. This is a perfect time to take a stand and be relentless, because we actually have the ability right now to stop Islam. We can see that there will still be Muslims, to be clear. There will still be Muslims. But as far as Islam conquering the world and so on, we have the ability to deal with that right now and make that not really an option for the future, not really a concern. So how would we go about this? Well, if the main strength of Islam, if the main advantage of Dawah, the only place it works is an atmosphere of ignorance, what do you think? What would be the solution? Yeah, making sure more and more people know, right? I mean, just look what it's done in the past 2 decades. Just look what's happened in the past 2 decades. So if that actually accelerates, well, that changes everything. And this is not difficult to figure out. So it's just a couple of things. One, if we know, people think that Muslims have all these objections to Christianity. No, they don't. It's your Bible's been corrupted. The Trinity doesn't make sense. If Jesus is God, how could he die? Why did Jesus pray? Where did Jesus say, I'm God, worship me? If Jesus died for your sins, does that mean you can sin all you want? That's it. That's what you're going to hear 95% of the time. I've never been able to figure this part out. If we all know what they're going to criticize us for ahead of time, how in the name of common sense has every church on the planet not prepared? Like how? I mean, imagine you're about to go face this other team in the Super Bowl and you find out they only have 5 plays. Do you think you might want to figure out what those 5 plays are and prepare for them? Think, even if you want to say no, because it's just for fun and, we just want a good game. Okay, what if you find out this other team, if they win, is gonna subjugate the entire world and they only have 5 plays? Do you think you might want to figure out those 5 plays then? I would. I'd learn those. I'd make sure everyone on my team knew those plays. And so if we know how they're going to criticize Christianity, my goodness, why do Christians not? Guess what? They're taught from the time they're born how to criticize Christianity, and Christians are almost never taught how to respond. And we wonder why did that guy convert to Islam? Wasn't ready. You didn't teach him anything. So there's that too. You can learn how to respond to their arguments, which I get to the point where when I see a Dawah guy now, I'm like, I actually want to hear him, because I have no idea what their arguments are now. Their main arguments from the past 20 years they acknowledge that they've failed. The scientific miracles argument, they say, no, it's been debunked. We don't use it anymore. The perfect preservation, that got destroyed. Thank you, Hatun. That's happened. Those things, their main arguments have all failed. It's to the point where when I hear, so why should we believe in Islam? I'm legitimately interested. What is this guy going to say? And so if we know what their arguments are going to be, then how do we not prepare for those arguments? Now, to be fair, you don't have to know everything, but just be prepared to do a little bit of work. Because if they give you an argument, I can guarantee if you go do a little bit of research, you're going to find out how silly that argument is. And I'm not saying, well, I disagree with their interpretation of the evidence or something like that. It's like earlier, the argument from evil came up yesterday. The problem of evil. If God exists, if an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good God exists, why is there so much suffering in the world? Okay, I disagree with the conclusion. I think they're responsive to that. But I don't think the atheist is trying to trick or deceive me when he brings that up. I understand why you would ask that question. Dawah arguments are in a different category. There's like the perfect preservation of the Quran. It's completely made up. It's a lie. And they knew they could get away with telling the lie because no one knew any better. So that's what I'm saying. All you have to do is go look it up, and you can point out all kinds of problems with the argument. So one, if you know some of their main arguments, you could familiarize yourself with those arguments. But two, even if someone presents you with a new argument, you're talking to a Muslim friend, he says, hey, I've got this new argument. Okay, you mind if I got back to you? That's very interesting. Would you mind if I looked that up and got back to you? He probably heard that from a Dawah guy, and he probably thinks if you go look it up, you're going to go find all this evidence. And so, wow, it's great. He's really interested in Islam. He's going to go look this up. And of course, then you come right back. Man, you said Muhammad is the greatest man of all time. What about this? Very easy stuff to do. Very easy. 3, I would say, learn to criticize Muhammad. And I don't say this just because I like criticizing Muhammad. This is actual research, thanks to our good friend Muhammad Hijab, who did this work for us. Muhammad Hijab, several years ago, asked his audience, asked his followers, those of you who are Muslims, when you start to doubt Islam, when you have doubts about Islam, what is it that causes those doubts? What is it that makes you doubt Islam? By far, the overwhelming answer was moral problems with Muhammad. And I looked at that and said, thank you, Mr. Hijab. Thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, just imagine you ask an entire population, say, what really starts to bother you about your religion? This. Okay, thank you. I know where my research is now. So, quite the blessing. And so the only other thing I would point out here, because time's about up, the only other thing I would point out here is, I understand there are some people who have a lot of time to deal with Islam, and other people who don't have a lot of time. You've got a bunch of other things you have to do in life. Everyone can do something here. Everyone could do something. I tell people, I mean, just imagine that 10,000 more Christians learned one criticism, or learned one relevant Quran verse, or learned one fact about Muhammad, learned one hadith, and they just shared it all over the place. Learning one thing, if you have enough Christians sharing it, that changes the world all of a sudden. That helps the collapse of Dawah. So don't think, oh, okay, I'll let these guys over here, they can deal with that because I don't have time. You've got time to learn one thing. Even better if you learn one argument and you learn to use that argument well. But everyone needs to get involved because, again, this is the time. There is no better time than right now for people to just take their stand. Because again, if this fails, if this Dawah push fails, no plan B. And I've said it hundreds of times. I believe, looking at the trajectory, if the trajectory continues as it is, said it hundreds of times, if the trajectory continues, we are going to see more people, more Muslims come to Christ in our lifetimes than all previous generations combined. That's what's going on right before us. Got a few minutes for questions? Just tell me when to stop, El.
Hello. So I am a business owner, and I have a lot of clients that are Muslim women. I'm a henna artist. How would be a really good way for me to witness to them without A, losing clients, and B, getting awful ratings to make my business just go down the drain?
Awesome question. This comes up in a lot of different contexts because I'll be talking about Muhammad and Aisha, and someone will be like, well, I got a Muslim friend. I don't want to just go, hey, your prophet's a pedophile or something like that, right? So it might ruin the friendship and so on. So I actually made a video on this several years ago titled something like how to share unpleasant facts with pleasant Muslims. But it's some of those ideas. But it's that idea of, okay, I don't want to upset this person. How do I start talking to a person? So I can run you through it right now. Matter of fact, I might want to spend the entire Q&A because it's a very, very important question. So one important thing that a lot of people in America don't seem to understand is that lots of Muslims would absolutely love to talk to you about Islam. Yeah. We've been just like conditioned to think that if you bring it up, it's just this horribly offensive thing and we're going to upset everyone and so on. Your Muslim client would probably love to tell you about Islam because she thinks that you've been given a false view of Islam by like media and so on. And two, Dawah, when we talk about Dawah's a command. Inviting people to Islam is a command. Surah 16, verse 125, invite people to the way of Islam, right? You're supposed to invite people.
Well, I'm also an ex-Muslim. So
yeah.
That kind of just cherry on top.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I might save that for later. I might save that for later down the road. So lots of people would love to talk to you about Islam. And so all you have to do is kind of like open the door and say, hey, even if it came up that you're an ex-Muslim, say, hey, I'm an ex-Muslim. So why do you believe in Islam? Why do you think that Islam is true? So you can open the door in a variety of ways. You can say to someone, hey, you're a Muslim. I hear about Muslims and so on. And I know there are different kinds of Muslims. So, what kind of Muslim are you? Or why do you believe that Islam is true or something like that? Or, hey, would you mind if I ask you some questions? Because I'd rather ask questions of a Muslim about Islam than maybe hearing from someone else. Or I've heard criticisms of Islam, but I'd like to hear what your perspective is, something along those lines. Anyway, it's just opening the door. And again, lots of people are going to be thrilled that you're asking them about Islam because they would love to talk to you about it. So that's one. And then normally I would say, one, if you just focus on asking questions instead of like blasting away, it's just much more non-confrontational, and it comes across as much less aggressive and hostile. So it's much less likely to offend the other person. So I tend to start off with I would call it what questions, just like, hey, what do you believe about God? Just let them talk. What do you believe about the Quran? What do you believe about Muhammad? What do you believe about Jesus? What do you believe about the Bible? And don't even respond. They could be spouting complete nonsense. Just try to understand what the person is saying. And that's making them, they like that. They like, oh, wow, this person's just asking me more and more questions.
So when do I pounce?
Wait for it. Wait for it. It's actually good if you have clients because you have a kind of, it's different from talking to someone on a bus where, you might have 10 minutes or something like that to talk to them. If you're going to be seeing someone longer term, that's like awesome situation. Matter of fact, that's the ideal situation. So one, start asking what questions, and then eventually transition into some why questions. Like, okay, so why do you believe that about the Bible? Why do you believe that about Muhammad? Why do you believe that about God? Why do you believe that about this? Why do you believe that? And then you get that person's specific reasons. Because Muslims might have all sorts of reasons and so on for believing various things. But now you're getting this person's reasons. And then after you've asked those questions, now you've got this person's reason. You say, hey, I'm really, really, really thankful that you shared why you believe these things. Would you mind if I went and pick an argument, pick a reason? Say, would you mind if I went and looked into this and then got back to you in case I have any more questions? And guess what? When you come back, you can still come back with just questions. It's very non-confrontational if you're trying not to upset the person. So you go right back in. So let's suppose the person said, Quran's been perfectly preserved right down to the letter. You go right back in and say, you were using this argument. You were telling me that the Quran's been perfectly preserved. So I was just wondering what you think about this, because this makes it sound like, and just you can be reading a hadith. You can show them a video of Hatun showing up to Speaker's Corner with 26 different Arabic Qurans or something like that. What do you think about this? And so notice you're just asking questions, and you're asking for information. You're not attacking. You're asking for clarification and for further information.
So getting them to say it out loud and hear it themselves, perhaps.
Yeah, but guess what? You can use this to get across the same information, possibly even way more effectively. The exact same information that I would blast away at Muhammad with, you can get the same information across to a Muslim in a very non-threatening, non-confrontational way. So compare these two approaches, right? Okay. Hey, your prophet's a pedophile. How do you listen to everything that this guy who had sex with a prepubescent little girl? Why do you listen to everything this guy said? Yeah. That comes across as very confrontational, right? Yeah. Compare that with, hey, you were talking about how Muhammad is one of the greatest men ever. I know this may be tough, but I really would like to hear your response. But I was reading this article from this site and so on, and it's talking about Muhammad, and there are all these sources saying that Muhammad, one of his marriages was with a young girl. I was just wondering, because I don't just want to believe this article. I'd like to get a Muslim's perspective on this. So if I gave you this, could you please look over it and then tell me your thoughts, maybe even talk to your imam and get back to me? Because I really, really would like to have a Muslim's reaction to this and how you would understand this. Because you're the one who said that, he's this great moral character. So I'd like to see how you reconcile this and so on. Right. Totally not. Now you're just asking for help and clarification again, right? Now you're saying, and guess what? That Muslim, she thinks, oh, I have to defend this because this woman's asking about this person who's attacking Islam. You can even go further. You can say, hey, I got this video by this total mean jerk, David Wood, and he said this. And I don't just want to believe him because, I mean, gosh, what a jerk. So I'd like your perspective on this, right? And so, guys, throw me under the bus. I do not care. I was born under the bus. I live under the bus. I'm good. I'm good. But anyway, so so there's a variety of ways, but the main idea is you can do all of the same stuff in various types of ways. And if you're in a debate context, you might want to be very forceful. If you're in some sort of relationship, a coworker, a fellow student, a client, and so on, you might want to approach things differently. And really, if you have some sort of long-term relationship with a person, that's actually way better, because you can take things step by step. And so that's what I would suggest. And it's fortunate because, again, if you sort of built up a foundation, like, hey, what do you believe about God? What do you believe about the Bible, and so on? Same applies there. So, hey, you said you believe this about Jesus. So I was just wondering how you would interpret what he says right here, that he says he's going up to Jerusalem to die, and that he's going to rise from the dead. Since you don't believe he died, how do you interpret that? Oh, your book's been corrupted. Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with me. Hey, got another question for you next week. Got another question for you. You said the Bible's been corrupted. I wanted to ask you about this in the Quran, which orders Christians to judge by the gospel and says we have no ground to stand upon unless we stand upon the gospel. And over here in this verse, it says that no one can change Allah's words, but you say it's been. So I was just wondering how you reconcile that with your claim that my book's been corrupted. And so notice there's no point where you're just not asking for information. You can have a conversation for months or years and never actually be doing something that is an attack. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. God bless you.